I took a DNA test as a joke. Now my family is destroyed. It started as a joke. One of those dumb things you do when you're bored, never expecting any real consequences. I was at my best friend Jake's apartment, scrolling through my phone when an ad popped up. Discover your roots. Take a DNA test today. Hey, I said, nudging him. I should do this. Maybe I'm secretly royalty. Jake snorted. Yeah, or you'll find out you're like 2% Neanderthal or something. We laughed, but the idea stuck. So, for fun, I ordered the kit. When it arrived a few days later, I spat into the tube, mailed it off, and forgot about it. A few weeks later, the results popped up in my inbox. I expected something generic. European ancestry, maybe a weird percentage from some random country. But as I scanned the report, my stomach twisted. It wasn't my ethnicity that shocked me. It was a notification at the bottom. Parent-child DNA match. 50%. Unknown individual. What? That made no sense. My parents were both still alive, and my siblings had never taken a test. Confused, I clicked on the match. It was a man named Brian Calloway. I didn't know any Brian Calloway. My hands started sweating as I read his profile. He was 56 years old, lived 2 states away, and according to the test, he was my biological father. My dad, my real dad, was not my dad. I sat frozen for a moment, my brain trying to reject what I was seeing. There had to be a mistake. Maybe there was a lab error. But the more I read, the clearer it became. The DNA test was 99.9% accurate. This wasn't a mistake. I wasn't who I thought I was. That night, I confronted my mom. She was in the kitchen washing dishes when I placed my phone on the counter, open to the DNA results. She frowned, drying her hands on a towel. What's this? I took a DNA test, I said, my voice strangely calm. It says Dad isn't my father. Her face drained of color. She staggered slightly, gripping the edge of the counter. For the longest time, she didn't say anything. Then she exhaled sharply, her expression unreadable. I was going to take this secret to my grave. My world shattered. She told me everything. How, in her 20s, she'd had an affair with a man she barely knew. My father, the man who raised me, never found out. He believed I was his son. I felt sick. The life I thought I had wasn't real. My dad wasn't my dad. And my mom had lied to him for over 20 years. When I told my dad, his face crumpled in a way I'd never seen before. That's not true, he whispered. This is some scam, some mix-up. But it wasn't, and he knew it. Within weeks, my parents were barely speaking. My dad moved into a hotel. My mom tried to apologize, but the damage was done. Then, one night, I got a message from Brian Calloway. Hey, I saw we matched. I think I might be your father. Would you like to talk? I stared at the message, my stomach twisting into knots. I had taken a DNA test as a joke. Now, my family was falling apart. And I wasn't sure I wanted to meet the man responsible for it. I stared at the message from Brian Calloway, my supposed biological father, for what felt like forever. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Every instinct told me to ignore it, to pretend I never saw it. But the damage was already done. My dad, no, the man who raised me, was still staying in a hotel. He hadn't answered my texts in days. Mom was barely eating, barely sleeping. The house was filled with a suffocating silence, and every time we made eye contact, her face crumpled with guilt. I had to know. Me. I don't know what to say. Brian Calloway. I understand. I didn't know about you either. Me. Are you sure? Brian Calloway. I think so. Your mother, we met a long time ago. She never told me she was pregnant. My breath hitched. He didn't know either. That was almost worse. Me. I don't know if I want to talk. Brian Calloway. That's okay. But if you ever do, I'm here. I closed the chat. My whole world had cracked open and I didn't know how to put it back together. A week passed, then another. My dad still wouldn't come home. Finally, I went to see him. The hotel room smelled like stale air and takeout, and he looked different. Not just tired. Hollow, like something inside him had been ripped away. I just needed time, he said, rubbing his face. But God, I don't know how to look at you the same. Those words hit harder than I expected. You're still my dad, I whispered. He let out a breath, shaking his head. I thought so too. But now, every time I see you, I wonder if I was just the fool in the story. His words stung like acid. I left that night knowing I'd lost something I could never get back. 3 months later, I finally agreed to meet Brian. We met at a coffee shop halfway between our towns. He looked like an older version of me. Same nose, same eyes. It was eerie. I don't expect anything from you, he said, stirring his coffee. I wanted to meet you. I wanted to hate him. I wanted to blame him for everything. But the truth was, he wasn't the villain. Neither was my dad. Neither was my mom. The truth was messy and painful. We talked for an hour. He told me about his family, his wife, his 2 kids, my half-siblings. They didn't know about me yet. You can be angry, he said at the end. But if you ever want to be in my life, the door's open. I didn't have an answer for him then. My parents' marriage didn't survive. My dad moved out permanently. He still loved me, but something had fractured between us that couldn't be fixed. I kept in touch with Brian. Slowly. Carefully. I wasn't sure I'd ever call him Dad, but maybe one day I'd call him something. I had taken a DNA test as a joke, and now I was living with the punchline. Months passed. My life felt like a before and after picture. Before the test, everything was normal. After the test, nothing made sense. I tried to pretend things were fine. I went to work, met up with friends, and smiled when I had to. But every time I looked in the mirror, I saw a stranger. I wasn't who I thought I was. My dad, well, my former dad, was barely speaking to me. We'd exchange occasional texts, mostly about practical things. Him. I'll send you the insurance papers. Me. Thanks. Him. You're still on the car title. Need me to sign it over? Me. Not yet. Each message felt colder than the last. Meanwhile, Brian, my biological father, kept reaching out. Slowly, carefully, like he was afraid I'd disappear if he moved too fast. At first, I ignored most of his messages. But one day, after a particularly bad fight with my mom, I answered. Me. Hey. Brian. Hey. Wasn't sure you'd text back. Me. Yeah. Just, I don't know what I'm doing. Brian. You don't have to know. We can just talk. And so we did. Brian told me about his life, about his wife, Linda, and their 2 kids, my half-siblings. They didn't know about me. Not yet. I don't want to drop this on them without warning, he admitted. But I want them to know you. When you're ready. I didn't know if I was, but the idea stuck in my head. Weeks later, Brian invited me to meet Linda. Just her. No kids. No big family dinner. Just one conversation. I almost didn't go. But something inside me, the part that needed answers, wouldn't let me ignore it. Linda was nothing like I expected. I thought she'd be cold or distant, maybe even angry. Instead, she was warm, welcoming. I won't pretend this isn't a shock, she said, giving me a small smile. But Brian is a good man, and if you want him in your life, we'll figure it out. I almost broke down right there, because she was accepting me more than my real dad was. Things with my mom got worse. She was drowning in guilt, and every conversation felt like a minefield. One night, I came home to find her crying at the kitchen table. She clutched an old family photo, the 4 of us smiling on some forgotten vacation. I ruined everything, she whispered. I sat down across from her. You didn't ruin everything, But you lied, Mom, and that broke things. Tears slid down her face. I didn't know how to tell the truth without losing you. I swallowed hard. You still have me. But Dad, I don't know if he'll ever forgive you. She nodded as if she already knew. I had to try one last time with my dad. I found him at the same hotel, sitting on the bed, staring at the TV without really watching it. He looked older, more tired than I'd ever seen him. I met Brian, I blurted. He flinched, looked away. That's your choice. No, I said. It's not. I didn't choose any of this. For the first time, he looked at me. Really looked at me. And what do you want from me? I hesitated. Then, I want my dad back. His face twisted with something I couldn't name. Pain? Regret? You're not my son, he said, his voice breaking. You never were. I felt my chest cave in. I stood there waiting for him to take it back. To say, but that doesn't change anything. He didn't. So I walked out. And I didn't look back. I won't lie and say things got better overnight. Losing my dad, the man who raised me, was like losing a limb. Some days I still reach for my phone, ready to text him. And then I remember. But I'm learning to live with the new version of my life. I still talk to my mom. It's not easy, but we're trying. I still talk to Brian. And one day maybe I'll meet my half-siblings. I took a DNA test as a joke. It destroyed my family. But maybe, just maybe, it gave me a new one. Life didn't magically get better after everything had collapsed. In fact, it felt like the more time passed, the more I realized how little I understood about my own life. I was stuck in this strange, liminal space. Neither here nor there, caught between two families that weren't fully mine. Weeks turned into months, and I tried to piece together a version of myself that made sense. I started therapy. Not because I wanted to, but because I had no choice. I couldn't keep pretending I was fine. It wasn't the therapy that helped me most, though. It was the quiet moments when I allowed myself to think things through, to breathe through the pain and confusion, even if only for a moment. One evening, I was at home alone, scrolling through social media. I had started following Brian's family online, mostly just Brian and his wife's posts. Pictures of them at the beach with their kids at some backyard barbecue and family vacations. But then, one day, there was a post that stopped me in my tracks. It was a picture of Brian and Linda sitting together in front of a fireplace, holding hands with the caption, "So proud of the steps we're all taking to move forward together." I stared at it for what felt like an eternity. Then, my phone buzzed. It was a call from Brian. "Hey," I said, picking up the phone. "Hey, I wasn't sure if you'd answer," he said, his voice soft but steady. I wanted to ask you something. Okay? I'm sure you've seen the post," he began, clearly nervous. "I've been talking with Linda, and we both think it's time to tell the kids about you. But I wanted to check in with you first." I froze. "You think it's a good idea?" I asked. "I think it's important," he said. "We're all part of the same story now. And I want them to know the truth. We're not asking for anything. But if you're ready, I think it could be a good step forward." The words hit me like a tidal wave. Part of me wanted to scream, to say no, to back away from it all. But deep down, I knew this was a choice I couldn't keep avoiding. I don't know if I'm ready for that," I admitted. "But maybe I need to be." "Take your time," Brian said gently. "There's no rush, but I think we're all here, waiting for you when you are ready." As I hung up, I thought about the years I had spent wondering if there was any hope of having a family again. And now, somehow, I was on the edge of having a whole new family, even if it wasn't the one I imagined. It was a few weeks later when I finally agreed to meet Brian's kids. We arranged to meet at a park. Something casual, no big family gathering. Just me, Brian, Linda, and their two kids. Max, who was 12, and Sophie, who was 9. I arrived first, sitting on a bench, heart hammering in my chest. It felt like I was about to walk into a room full of strangers, even though they were part of me. Brian and Linda arrived, smiling nervously as they approached. Max and Sophie hung back at first, a little unsure about the situation. "Hey," Brian said, introducing me. "This is my son, your brother." The word hit me like a brick. Brother. It didn't feel real, not in that moment. Sophie, the younger one, was the first to speak. "So, you're really our brother?" I nodded, swallowing hard. "I guess so." Max didn't say much at first, but then he looked at me, studying my face, then broke into a small smile. "It's weird," he admitted, "but cool, I guess." That broke the ice. And for the first time in months, I felt like I might actually be able to fit into this new reality. A few days later, I had a long conversation with my mom. It wasn't easy. We both had a lot of things to say, and neither of us knew how to put it all into words. She was still struggling with the guilt, still wishing she could undo the past. But she knew she couldn't. She wasn't asking for forgiveness anymore, just for understanding. "I never wanted to hurt you," she said, tears in her eyes. "I thought I was protecting you by keeping the secret. But I see now, I just made everything worse." I wanted to tell her it was okay, that everything was going to be okay, but I couldn't. Not yet. "I need time, Mom," I said softly. "But I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose this family, even if it's different now." She nodded, her lips trembling. "I understand." In the months that followed, things continued to shift. I spent more time with Brian's family. It wasn't the same as being with my original family. There was no replacing that. But it was still meaningful. It wasn't a perfect family, but it was mine. I still talked to my dad, though not as often as before. He never really came around. There was always this unspoken distance between us now, but I couldn't keep waiting for him to change. As for my mom, well, we were still rebuilding. It was slow, painful, but it was progress. And maybe that's all we could ever ask for. I took a DNA test as a joke. It destroyed my family. But it also gave me the chance to find a new one. And in the end, that was the greatest gift I could have asked for.